First, I wanted to introduce the Gender Equality Academy. For those of you who still don't know the project, it's an European project funded by Horizon 2020, and it aims at developing and implementing a coherent, high-quality capacity building program on gender equality in research and innovation, using a holistic approach. And as you can see, it provides tailor-made trainings in different formats. And okay, so as you can see, we have a 3 days very intense program. This, you should know that this was originally designed to be a face-to-face training, 1.5 day training, which is like 10 or 12 hours. And we have transformed that into these 3 sessions of 1.5 hours each. So it has been quite difficult. It's going to be like a lot of content, really squeezed to fit this online format. So I ask for your empathy here and your understanding, because maybe I will need to be rushing at some point. So I'm sorry for that. But the other thing I wanted to tell you is that we didn't want to lose the participatory approach with which it was originally designed. So we have saved one space every day for gathering together in groups, so we can share some experiences, and you can also be part and share your knowledge and experiences with the rest. So I hope you enjoy that part. But this implies that we needed to skip the, this traditional format of a webinar where we have like 1 hour of somebody explaining and then like 20 minutes, half an hour of queries and answer, or 15 minutes. So we had to put that in the balance, and we decided to use that time for gathering together in groups and sharing experiences. But it doesn't mean that we're not going to have the query and answer space, but we will do it through the chat. So please just leave all your questions whenever you want, leave them on the chat, and they will be collected, and we will answer them and send all the answers by email to everyone. So everyone will have the answers to all questions still. Okay, so this way we can have both things, like the gathering and the sharing experiences, and also the questions that will be answered by emails. We hope that this formula works for you, but of course, all comments are welcome. Okay, so today we will start with the very basics on gender equality, the basic concepts and the main European frameworks and policies. And then we will see some of the problems at stake right now. What are the inequalities right now in academia? And we will end up with this first glance to the definition of what is a gender equality plan. And then day 2 and day 3, we will dedicate them to go into the planning and to go through all the steps for doing a gender equality plan, right? Then it is important to remark that this is a basic training, okay? It's a basic level training. So we have this following objective: to familiarize with basic concepts, to sensitize about the key problems at stake regarding gender in research and innovation, to raise awareness about the importance of institutional change, and to familiarize with the concept of a gender equality plan. Okay, I have gone through the registration list, and I've seen that many of you have already experienced and have knowledge on the issue. So being this a really basic training, what I would like to ask is to encourage you to share that expertise and that knowledge with the rest, not only during the group, but also using the chat, just to leave any reference you think can be interesting for the rest, or concepts or extra explanations, even if you feel like. So please feel free to not use the chat box only for dropping a question, but also to interact with the rest and leave some answers there and say your knowledge. Okay, so having said these, let's start already. Okay, we need to start with the most basic concepts on the gender theory to ensure that we all have a common understanding of what are we talking about when we talk about gender. Okay, it is important for institutional change to use a common terminology, but it is also important to be clear that we all understand the same by this terminology, right? First, of course, the first thing we need to do is to differentiate between sex and gender. So we could say that sex refers to the biological characteristic of men and women in terms of reproductive organs and functions based on chromosomal complement and physiology. So it is a condition globally understood. And although nowadays we could say that sex cannot be like fully encapsulated in this binarity, it normally differentiates the classification of living things as males and female. While gender, on the opposite, has nothing to do with biology, but with socially constructed roles, behaviors, activities, and attributes that a given society considers appropriate for men and women, and therefore defining what we understand by femininity and masculinity in its culture. So as socially constructed, it varies in time and place and between cultures. Okay, so as a concept, gender is thus, we could say, like more fluid than sex, although we could also say that changes in the social understanding of gender roles takes time. It's not that fluid and that easily changeable. But whatever, besides further debate that we could already have at this point, the two key points that I would like to stress out here are, first, gender is about power, okay? And it's about relationships. So as an analytical concept and category, it will help us explaining the unequal relationships and to explain oppression, which of course should be at the core of any gender analysis, right? I think I said the first one, and I said first two ideas. It's about power and it's about relationships. So it's also changeable. Sorry, I forgot about the second idea about power and that it's changeable. Okay, we can transform that. Okay. Then the main ideas we need to grasp from the sex gender theory. The first one, the problem is not the difference between men and women as such, but the difference in how they are valued. So gender determines what is expected and allowed and valued in a woman or a man in a given context, and certain aspects associated with masculinity still tend to be valued more highly. So this idea can be summed up in this sentence that gender has to do with the value we assigned to the sexual difference, okay? Then gender is not only an individual attribute, but also and mainly a major organizing system that structures patterns of interactions and expectations across other major social institutions, okay? So we need to withdraw these ideas that gender is about women issues only, or that gender is just about reaching equal numbers or things like that, because it is much more than that. And the result of a gender system is inequality of opportunities, segregation, and discrimination. And these that we're talking about is reproduced in all instances and in all social institutions, from media to schools to church and religions and to any cultural narrative. As you can see here, I brought this example, this graphic on the right that shows the speak time of men and women in Best Picture winning films. So as you can see, there's quite a big gap in the time of voice that are given to men and women in films. So it's a quite illustrative example, I would say. So we could conclude that gender is the social construction of reality, okay? Which is something that already Simone de Beauvoir said back in the 40s, okay? So the main idea here is to understand, as I was saying before, how gender builds and sustain power relations, right? So let's go to our next concept. That would be gender equality, which would be the situation where individuals of both sexes are free to develop their personal abilities and make choices without the limitations imposed by strict gender roles. The different behaviors, aspirations, and needs of women and men are considered, valued, and favored equally. Thus, it indicates the absence of barriers in general. So what we need to be aware here is that such barriers nowadays are quite often more indirect than direct than explicit. So they're quite difficult to discern in many occasions. And we need to understand also that these barriers are maintained by structural phenomena and by social representations and by social beliefs that are sometimes very quite resistant to change, okay? So here it's important to understand that gender equality does not mean that women and men will become the same, just like that, because that's quite simplistic, we could say, but that women's and men's rights and responsibilities and opportunities will not depend on whether we are born male or female, okay? So if gender equality was our objective, well, I would say that the objective is to end with patriarchy, but anyway, let's put it that way, specifically if we need to sell that in our institutions. Okay, so gender equality, it's our objective, and gender mainstreaming would be our strategy, okay? So we could define gender mainstreaming as a strategy based on the reorganization, improvement, development, and evaluation of policy processes, so that a gender equality perspective is incorporated in all policies at all levels and all stages by the actors normally involved in policymaking, okay? So doing this, what requires is to systematically consider all the difference between the conditions, the needs, the experiences of everybody, of women and men in all policies and all actions that we want to undertake, okay? These, if we're talking about structural change processes, means that we need to assess the implication for women and men of any action we plan, okay, in all areas and at all levels of our institutions, right? So gender mainstreaming would be a way of making all men's and women's experiences an integral dimension of our planning, right? So as a strategy, its ultimate goal will be to achieve what we call substantive gender equality. This substantive gender equality opposes to the formal equality that we do have in papers already, okay? We have the laws and we have like a formal equality, but we don't have like a real actual one, which is what we call the substantive gender equality, right? So next, we had the goal, we had the strategy, we need an approach. So what we would need to apply is an intersectional gender approach, which is a social research method in which gender, ethnicity, class, sexuality, and other social differences are simultaneously analyzed, okay? This is a term that was coined for the first time by Kimberly Crenshaw in the late 80s and has become a key analytic framework through which feminist scholars in various fields talk about interlocking systems of power and oppression, okay? So if we put this simply, it means that according to an intersectional approach, inequities are never the result of single factors, but rather it would be the outcome of the intersections of different social locations and different power relations, and of course different experiences, because as we can see like in the graphic here on the right, every person could be defined as a mosaic of identities. All right, so Having this intersectional approach will allow us to understand both privilege and oppression in all its different forms, okay? And the key potentiality of this approach is that it enables multi-level analysis of these complex relations between different inequalities, right? I recommend you to check one of the webinars of the Gender Academy in the YouTube channel of Gender Academy on intersectional approach. We can send you the reference also by email. Sorry, I don't have it here, but we'll share that with you. It was really interesting. Okay, so before getting into our next session, the main conclusion drawn from this first one would be, first, again, that gender is about power, right? And therefore, it is a highly political issue. And this means that we should not understand or use gender only as a technical tool, but we should focus on its political aspect, all right? Because otherwise, we will lose its transformative potential. Okay, so let's stick to this idea. So having done this very quick review of the main basic concepts, let's go through the basics of the European framework, okay? Okay, we should start by saying that gender equality has been a core principle of the European project since 1957, when this principle of equal pay for work of equal value became part of the Treaty of Rome, as you can see there. So since then, there has been, and until the 90s, there has been like different directives and regulations on social security issues and the labor market and pensions and educations and other things. But what we will do is that we will focus on the specific milestones just after 1995. That was already during this framework program 4, all right? For those of you who are not familiarized with this terminology, the framework programs are the funding programs of the European Commissions to support and to foster research, responsible research in the European research area, okay, which is also known as the ERA. And why do I want to start here in 95? Because, as you can see now, we had like this big event in 95, the Beijing conference. And it was after this conference that the Commission decided to adopt a mainstreaming strategy for gender equality in all the European Commission policies. And of course, specifically also in research, the strategy was already introduced in the next program, in the negotiation phase of the framework program 5. And it's important to acknowledge this, okay, and to really acknowledge this kind of event, because it is not these kind of decisions, like this one made in the European Commission to mainstream gender, they don't just come out of the blue, okay? It is important to understand and to acknowledge the work of the feminist movement here and the work of the women organizations here that are working for years, many times, doing the political awareness and doing all this work behind the scenes. So then we can finally have this kind of policies and decisions approved. Okay, so this is why I really wanted to focus on this. Then, okay, already during the FP5, next milestone would be 1999. We need to highlight here the communication on women on science, okay? Because this communication set up 3 major objectives. The first one was to deepen the knowledge on the situation of women in science. And please think here that we were already at the threshold of the 21st century, okay, almost the year 2000. And we were saying that we didn't have enough information on women in science at this point, okay? We were recognizing that we didn't have information on that, okay? Then the second objective was to increase the number and the role of women in science and engineering and technology. And the third one was to mainstream gender in all other policies and specifically in research, okay? So it was important because at this point, some members, they were already paying attention to the issue, but other states, they took their lead from here, from this communication from the Commission. Okay, so it was a milestone also because of that. And then after this mainstreaming strategy was set up, the next framework programs already in FP5, but also in the framework program 6 and 7, they were already supporting activities to increase the number of women in science, okay, and to mainstream gender in the content of research, okay. Then our next milestone would be 2003, because here the first She Figures was published. If you know, it's a report done by the European Commission that has been periodically published since then, since 2003, and it makes available sex disaggregated data on human resources in the European research area, which we didn't have until 2003, okay? So this is why it is also an important milestone here. And then a big step was taken afterwards in 2007, because already for FP7, the new focus for activities changed to research institutions and organizations, and instead of focusing on women themselves, okay? So this is what we call fixing organizations, which became the new objective, okay? And here we need to acknowledge the role of Londa Schibinger, because at this conference that you see here, Gender Issues in Research, that was held in Berlin in 2007, okay, because she was the one to champion this change of approach, okay. From here, we jump directly to 2014, and here gender equality was set up as a priority in the European Research Area Roadmap, which is the European instrument for all member states and associated countries on research. And it endorsed the integration of the gender dimension into research and innovation policies and all programs and projects. And it was to be included as a cross-cutting issue already in the Horizon 2020 program here, okay? And next year, we will already have a new program, which is Horizon Europe. And in fact, for this program, the consultation process has been recently closed, just last September. And during this process, the Directorate General for Research and Innovation of the European Commission already highlighted that all public institutions will be required to design and to implement a gender equality plan in order to be eligible for funding under this Horizon Europe framework program. Okay, so this is really a big hit. Okay. So specifically, what are the gender equality objectives in research and innovation in the European Union? Okay, so we have 3 objectives underpinning the strategy of gender equality in this Horizon 2020 that were fostering gender equality in scientific careers in order to close the gaps in the participation of women, then ensuring gender balance in decision-making processes and bodies, and this includes panels and advisory groups and so on, and integrating the gender dimension in research and innovation content, which helps improve the scientific quality of knowledge, of course. And of course, it helps also improve the social relevance of any science we make, okay? So regarding the requirement at national level, what is the responsibility of the countries? And what is the responsibility of the institutions also? Well, the ERA roadmap encourages member states to make institutional change a key element of the national policy frameworks, stating that they should develop policies on gender equality in RPOs, which would be research performance organizations, and regularly monitoring their effectiveness. And RPOs should in turn review and enhance their policies for gender equality in research and ensure their implementation. Okay, so responses to inequalities should take place in institutions, but be prompted by national policies. Okay, because we have seen that in those countries that has a legal obligation, like for example we have in Spain or there is in Belgium, in France, and in Switzerland, or the countries, in Finland. In those countries, gender equality plans are found in greater number, okay? But anyway, however, there is still not a lot of countries, like 8 or 10, I think, member states that have these specific provisions requiring the implementation of gender equality plans. And the thing here is that having this gender equality principle enshrined as one of the priorities of the European policies and of the era, and with a clear commitment from the Commission, it really reinforced the importance of the gender equality plans. And in these last years, in fact, with all the last framework programs, GEPs have been like really a pioneering tool towards institutional change, as we will see. So with Horizon Europe program, the aim is to keep on the path and to achieve sustainable impact and to achieve like a multiplier effect on this regard, okay? So after this quick overview of the basics, I hope you're all okay. I'm sorry, I'm sharing my screen and I cannot see you there or the chat, but I hope everything is okay so far. As I was saying, after this quick and fast overview of the basics, let's look now at what are the problems at stake and what are the inequalities still existing in academia, okay? Some of you mentioned in your expectations that you wanted to know a bit more about gender inequalities. So this part is for you. I hope you find this small summary interesting. Please ask anything, any further information you may want of any of these aspects, okay? Okay, first, we check some really basic data. The first finding is that whatever, and you know, despite this, of course, the general positive annual growth rate of women researchers that we also need to acknowledge, still, and as you can see here, significant gender inequalities are still persisting. So we can start this section by saying that higher education, which in fact attracts significant national public funding and European funding, it is a site of gender inequality still. And we will prove it in these next slides. Okay, so first, a quick glance at this, and we can see that the proportion of women among researchers is just a bit over 30%. Okay, so we should ask ourselves, what are the obstacles preventing women from being more present and from using their full potential in academia? So let's go for some concepts that will help us understand these inequalities. First, we need to talk about horizontal segregation. This is a concept that refers to how sectors and occupations are segregated, separated, okay? So as we can see, differences among scientific areas persist, okay? And a gender analysis of this allows us to see how sectors are mainly occupied according to very stereotyped women and men attributes and roles, okay? As we can see in this graphic, women are much more likely to go for medical science and for social science and for humanities, while men goes more for natural science, engineering and technology and so on. So one consequence of this, first, is this, of course, the pool of potential leaders in each area is, as we can see, still uneven, okay? And here it's also crucial to notice that the sectors where women are clustered, they are lower paid than those where men are clustered, okay? So we are starting to see how different inequalities are related to each other, okay? We will go on this, deepening on this. There is one feminist scholar that this Alice Eagle, that when analyzing this phenomenon, she describes how women tend to experience what she calls the lack of fit for masculine sectors, which of course has a lot to do with gender roles, right? Then our next concept would be vertical segregation. But before going into this specific inequality, I would like to ask you, how many of you know the percentage of women owning full professorship in your institution? This would be like grade A, okay? So guess, what is the percentage of women owning full professorship? If you don't know, what would you say? Okay, so I'm launching this poll just quickly, but many of you would say that it's less than 20%. So let me show you what is the reality. It is also interesting to see what we think and what it is. So, to know, for your information, the European average of women in grade A position, it says here 24% is not even 24, in fact it's 23.7. So here, I don't know if you can see that, this is grade A, okay, despite we have more than 50% in the lower ranks here, okay? So the thing here is that we're not even in the 30%, which is considered the, this crucial cutoff point of the critical mass. We're not even there. So, the reason when we talk about vertical segregation is that we can still see striking imbalances between the number of women and men at the highest level of academia in the great majority of European countries. Okay, this is the average, but in the great majority of countries, it's like that. And what data is also showing is that the rate of improvement is really low, is extremely low. Okay, so we really need to tackle this issue. And then another interesting data that we have here from C-Figures, all these graphics and information on the C-Figures and the publication webpage, right? If you want to look for more of them. C-Figures also focuses on the presence of women on scientific boards and scientific boards of, academic committees, which usually hold a large degree of decision-making power. So it's important that we also look at this. And here we really have also some worrisome data, because as we can see, women only represented 20% of board leaders in the European Union in 2017. And moreover, there are like 15 countries that either have no women at all in boards, or they have less than 20% of women among board leaders, okay? So this is confirming that this pace of progress still remains really too slow, okay? This difference on the academic career can also be seen very clearly in these graphics that you see here. These are the so-called scissors graphic or diagram. On the left, you can see the general path at all disciplines, and on the right, you see the graphic that refers to STEM disciplines, okay? But still, you can see the differences, but both show a sharp decrease after the PhD degree, right? If we look at the last one, the senior academic positions, we can see that women ratios are much, much lower than those of their male colleagues, much more than what would be expected, given the growing numbers of women among higher education graduates. In fact, it's higher here, as you can see, in the recent decades, okay? And then there is one really powerful metaphor that has been used to describe this phenomena that we're talking about, which is the leaky pipeline. And as you can see here, it represents how women are dropping out as we move up the career ladder, okay? And the problem is quite clear with this graphic. We can see how, despite we start from an even balanced numbers at the first steps, the women make up less and less on the research workforce as they move up all the career ranks, right? And And in academic research, the most significant barrier seems to be this transition here from this step from postdoctoral researchers to these figures like positions like principal investigators, okay, and other qualified positions. Okay, other metaphors besides this one that has been used to describe these phenomena that we're talking about are, for example, the sticky floor or the glass walls or the glass ceilings. There are lots of them. We cannot go through all of them because we don't have the time. I'm sorry for that, but you can add some of them in the chat box if you feel like, okay, and give some information. And then one other thing to have into consideration here is how all inequalities are related, that I was saying before. And this vertical segregation accounts for a significant proportion of what we call the gender pay gap, which is the next slide. We need to talk also about the working conditions and the gender pay gap, okay? Because as we see here, in 2/3 of the countries, women researchers in the higher education sectors are more likely than men to be in part-time employment, okay? In the higher education sector, women researchers are more likely than men to be employed under precarious contracts. And here, the most affected are junior academic positions, okay? And with precarious contract, we talk about even people without contract or with fixed terms or up to 1 year contracts or with other non-fixed terms or like non-permanent contracts and things like that, okay? And then women researchers generally have lower access to resources and lower success rates, grants and awards procedures, which has to do with the next inequality, so also related to the gender biases, we will see. So in terms of equal payment, there is still a considerable gender pay gap in scientific occupations. As we can see here, women in the European Union earn on average over 17% less than men, okay, which is already quite high, still quite high. And the worrying fact here is also that this gender pay gap it's really not moving. It has become like totally stagnant over the last years, like 5 or 10 years. So the research and what the studies are showing is that this current rate of changes, we won't close this gender pay gap until the next millennium. So really something to take care about, okay? And still, practical application of equal pay provision has proven to be one of the most problematic, and really the countries are really resistant to transpose the regulations of the European Commissions. There are quite good regulations on this in the European Union, but really countries are quite resistant to apply them and to implement them, okay? So let's talk now about the gender unconscious biases and the masculine image of science. If I ask you to close your eyes for 1 second and think of an important scientist, what is the first image that will come to mind? First thing that you can picture. Because the most probable is that you picture just the same as Google does. If you type in a Google browser, important scientist, guess what? Here we have a white, middle-aged man, of course. It's all men, except one here you see when women are named here, of course we're clustered. It has to be in these articles of 10 women scientists, because we come like in packs, you know, we come like 10 by 10. We don't have like an image for ourselves and our achievements. Okay, so the thing here is that historically the production of knowledge has been associated to men, and mainly this white middle-aged men. Okay, so we learn these associations since we're really little, at a very early age, and it is really hard to change this because this association is both sustained by and contributing to, so it's feeding itself to this androcentricity in science. We didn't go through this concept of androcentricity before, but you probably all know it, but just in case, it can be defined as like the adoption of an overall male perspective for everything. Okay, so the thing is that this topic has been widely studied, and what research shows is that it is present even in countries where women are already half of the nation's researchers, of the scientific population. Still, this there is like a direct relation, and still persisting this masculine image of science. Okay, so we can say that it is really entrenched and is linked to a sharp impact of the gender stereotypes. And the thing is that, of course, it leads to the invisibilization of women, and of course the subsequent lack of reference, which is really important for little girls. And of course, this severe underrepresentation in all areas, also in decision making and so on. And also it has other effects, like this so-called Matilda effect, was so called by Rossiter in the 90s, when she was explained that women are like permanently downplayed and minimized by their male colleagues. Okay, so it's all a consequence of the same thing, and everything is like interlinked. Okay, then gender blind and gender biased research. So would you say that in general a research can be gender neutral? As you can see, most of you say that it cannot be gender neutral. 4 people saying I'm not sure, and 6 people saying that yes, it can be gender neutral. Okay, so this is really a debate that we're probably all having in our institutions. Okay, so in general, you say no. So the reality is that, in fact, difficult. As you can see, first, let's go through the concepts, okay? So we can have the debate. Gender blindness would mean failing to take into account potential sex differences, as well as the gender roles and conducts of women and men in society. Okay, so being gender blind would lead to reproducing stereotypes and biases and inequalities, and it also leads to having a gender biased research. It happens, for example, to have a practical example, when we extrapolate the research results to the population as a whole without considering the sample composition, which is known as overgeneralization. Okay, so this happens, for example, you can see the picture here. This happens when the seatbelts of the car are designed using, normally has been designed using dummies with male features, with a standard stature and weight of men, which is like 180 and 80 kilograms. And now, in very recent years, some are starting to say that we need to use other kind of dummies with other features, because if you have been pregnant and you have used a seatbelt, you have probably thought at some point, who is designing this shit? This is really uncomfortable. Why don't they make one that would fit for this kind of body, right? And this happened also when they used these male featured dummies for chasing airbags. Okay, when they first did these airbags, they were, it was like a big hit. And after, a couple of months, they saw that, in the accidents, there were, in fact, less like mortal victims, but mainly in those driving and male. But those that were normally not driving, which is women, they were still having like a high rate of death. And they were saying, but why is that? Why is it not working? Okay, because you have tasted this product with a male feature dummy, with a standard male and average body, and with 80 kilograms and, different height and so on. So they said, oh my God, this was gender blind. So who could have thought, if you ask the people doing airbags, can this be gender blind or can this be gender neutral? And they say, yeah, of course, an airbag is totally gender neutral. Well, it is not, as we can see. So the results of this is that the viewpoints and the experiences and the needs of half the population here are totally overlooked and totally dismissed, which in turn leads to having products and services and, of course, policies that only serve a proportion of the society. And another interesting fact here that I wanted to bring is that only 1.79% of all research published between 2013 and 2017 included a sex or a gender dimension in its content, which is really low. And well, I thought this might be of interest for those of you that said in your expectations that you wanted some insights for your doctoral research. So maybe this can be of use. You can give it a thought and how you can use that for your research and in general, right? Okay, and then let's go to talk about unconscious gender bias, which occurs when we make judgment or decisions on the basis of our prior experiences and our own personal deep-seated thoughts, patterns, assumptions, or interpretation, and we're not aware that we're doing it. So bias has an impact in our representations and how we elaborate our ideas and, of course, our values. And if it's influenced by our personal background, but also, of course, by all the social and the cultural expectations and stereotypes and so on. So what we are talking here is about unintentional preferences. And if we specifically talk about gender bias, we refer to all these prejudiced differentiation between men and women, and specifically those differentiation that places one gender in a hierarchical position relative to the other. Okay, guess which one? So in the case of gender and recruitment, I brought here this example. Some studies have shown that applications with a male name are rated more highly than the identical application presented with a female name. Okay, I recommend you to check this study from Meritocracy in 2012. It's really interesting. So these biases influence both the participation of women in research and, of course, the validity of science and research itself. Okay, and how does it work? Let's see this short video is an example.
Father and son are driving a car. They get into a car accident. The dad dies. The son gets rushed into A&E. Yeah. The surgeon says, I cannot operate. This is my son. Who's the surgeon? Oh my gosh!
Well, it could be his biological father because he's adopted.
The father of the boy.
A ghost? A priest?
The surgeon's the dad.
The farmer?
The father died, so
Yeah.
it can't be the father. It's down to God to say.
God?
The wife had an affair with the surgeon.
Either his stepfather or biological father.
His brother. Surgeon's the mother.
Oh my god, yes! It makes so much sense. Damn! Oh, that's so annoying!
That's terrible, isn't it?
Oh.
Yeah, obviously.
Oh my gosh!
Ah, okay.
Oh, yeah, obviously, and we all automatically assume that the surgeon's a man.
Okay, I hope you liked that. There is another example of video that I recommend you to check. It is called Redraw the Balance. It's an experiment with kids in a school. It's really nice. And it explains how these unconscious gender bias work, okay? And the idea we need to keep here is that this formation of preferences derives from really entrenched social construction, okay? A couple of you mentioned in your expectations that you were interested in knowing a bit more about biases. So for you, I recommend you to read one book. You will have the reference at the end of the presentation. You will all have the materials, okay? The presentation will be shared with everyone. You will see the reference of this book, Invisible Women, by Caroline Criado Perez. It's really nice, and you will have lots of examples there, okay? And also this issue of gender bias in research is left like practically untouched in a number of policy contexts. So it's really necessary to take care about as well. Okay, I'm a little bit behind schedule, so let's move forward. Well, you will have these quotes just to let you know that we have been talking about these prejudice and biases since the 17th century, and we're still talking about that. So let's go with just two more concepts, okay? And we'll go directly into the group work. I hope at this point everyone is okay. I cannot see your faces or anything. I hope you're doing fine. So let's go. Two more concepts and we'll go into the groups. The first one would be the concept of gendered organizations, okay? So the gender organization theory, which was coined by John Acker in the 90s, maintains that inequalities persist in workplaces because gender is embedded in organizations. This is that gender is present in all the processes, the practices, the images, the ideologies of the organization. And this theory directs attention at the systemic norms and structures that drive the gendered nature of the workplace. Okay, so what John Acker was arguing here is that despite all these advances in the gender theorizing that we have, we're still considering institutions as if they were gender-free or as if they were gender-neutral, when in fact, gender really permeates everything. As we have seen with science, it also permeates the ideologies and the practices of an organization and the symbols of the organization, everything. So this concept helps us to understand how universities and research organizations are really still stuck in these masculine models of managing, of organizing, and of course, of researching and teaching. So the main concept related to these that we need to work with when we're talking about institutional change is organizational culture, okay? This concept refers to the basic assumptions and beliefs shared by members of an organization that operate unconsciously and define in taken for granted fashion an organization's views of itself and its environment. Okay, it encompasses lots of things, pervasive images, symbols, and ideologies about femininity and masculinity, among other things. So according to this definition, we could say that every organization is a culture itself, okay? And every organization, as a gendered organization, have shared beliefs and values and of course, informal norms and paths and language that are reinforcing inequalities. Without noticing many times, okay? So I'm giving a couple of examples, but I'm sure that you can also share some interesting one in the chat if you feel like. First, if we talk about images, imagine that your institution needs to pick up one picture to represent the institution. I'm sure that you can all picture this image of a professor as a successful white man that is endowed with epistemic authority. Okay, so this is, of course, not gender neutral. And if we talk about shared beliefs, or if we talk about ideologies, one is how we take like gendered ways of thinking when we think about work. Like, for example, this idea that to have a successful academic career, we need to work all hours, right? As if we had no caring responsibilities or other life besides work, okay? Then last, another characteristic of this gendered organizational system is the so-called second generation gender biased. They're so named because it has mostly replaced overt discrimination. So the thing here is what we were talking about, that these discrimination patterns are now much more subtle and less visible forms of prejudice, okay? So all of this, what reinforces is the idea of what we were saying, changing the focus and the approach and focusing on the systemic formal and informal norms and structures instead of focusing on the individual level issues and focusing on women, okay? And the last concept before going to the groups, meritocracy and excellence, which really show us how gender is embedded in the organization. First, our academic world is fundamentally based on this idea of meritocracy, as you all know, in which merit or talent is the basis for sorting people into higher positions and distributing rewards, okay? So meritocracy system dictating the candidates should be appointed on the basis of their merit, and this is a principle that is inherently gender bias, although it is based on the assumption that the academic recruitment system is gender neutral and provides one supposedly with equal opportunities to advance solely on the basis of the individual merit and talent and efforts. Okay. Then merit is a core institutional principle that is the root of much resistance to change, but still as a concept and principle remains totally unquestioned. And it's often used as an argument to resist gender equality initiatives, okay? And we need to say that a meritocratic system is assumed to excellence, which is considered to be the most important measure for a researcher's work, but how it is measured is always socially constructed as well. So the understanding of how to measure excellence is, of course, it is definitely a burning subject, and it varies widely among institutions, but we can say that there's more and more people and institutions that are now prompting the transformation of this academic culture on this regard, okay, and that understand that excellence is always socially constructed, and therefore it is not neutral, okay. So this is the last part of the day. We need to talk about what is institutional change. So the European Union defines this concept of institutional or structural change. You can also find it as structural change. And it is defined by the European Commission as a strategy aiming at removing obstacles to gender equality inherent to the research system itself and adapting the practices of organizations. What are its main objectives? Well, it's to enhance women's representation and retention at all levels. So we skip this dropping along the career ladder, and to promote the integration of the gender dimension in research and in innovation content. Okay, the thing I wanted to bring this because I like this or the meaningful impact. In the last report, European Commission report on responsible research in 2019, they highlighted that an institutional change is a change that is expected to have meaningful impact within the institution concerned, and it's intended to last beyond the lifetime of any project or of any equality plan or anything, okay? Then, what are the main ideas that we need to grasp from here? The first idea is that, as we saw in the slide with this timeline of the European policies, the framework should be focused on the organization and not in women, okay? Then, structural change means making our institution more gender aware. The group number 3 was talking about the importance of having awareness, right? So thereby it requires the transformation to, when you're really aware, it will transform the whole organizational culture and not only transforming the policies and the structures, okay? Because then we will have this formal equality, but not the substantive, the actual equality, right? Then it implies systemic and integrated long-term approaches rather than these short-term and piecemeal measures, okay? Also, feminist scholars, and I like this one very much, change is made possible because institutions are full of contradiction and conflicting interests, and therefore can create opportunities. So this is really a nice one. I like it. We really shouldn't be afraid of contradictions. We all have contradictions. This is the way to move forward, okay? And to look for the windows of opportunities within these contradictions, okay? And then each institution has its unique culture, its history, of course, its internal ways of organization. You have set that in one group, no? It was so different, the context of each one. So it is impossible to make generalization about institutional highest priorities, okay? We cannot just grab one gender equality plan that has been successful in one institution and implement it directly in our institution. Or we cannot make generalizations about which structures or which measures have a greatest impact, or we cannot make generalizations about the money or the sums that need to be allotted to its action, because each institution needs to reflect its particular situation, its particular context, and then make an informed choice for that, okay? And okay, I will just go really quickly because it's already our time. I can go also maybe next day, but just to let you know, the different areas of intervention, we will be addressing this when talking about the step 2 of the gender equality plan. So I'm not really afraid of going like very quickly through this, but the idea is that we really need to tackle all the areas of the institution, okay, to have a successful and a meaningful impact. And have this graphic here made by Aruna Rao and her team that she emphasizes that we need to work on the deep structure of the institutions, okay, which means also taking into account values, history, culture, everything, okay, to have this meaningful impact. You have a couple of quotes here, and then if you are okay with this, because I don't want to take more of your time, maybe next day we can start with this definition of what is a gender equality plan, okay? And we will go through these basic ideas. And, you know, this was only a couple of slides that we can leave for the next day. That's okay with you. I'm sorry about this. But I wanted you to know that you have some useful resources to complete all this information that we've gone through today. So please go and check them all. This is the book, of Caroline Criado, which is really nice. And this was just published this year, the second one, the Gender Sensitive University. Really nice with different articles on different issues. I really recommend you this one as well. Okay. Thank you for being there and see you next Friday. Have a great day, everyone, and stay safe. Thank you. Bye-bye.